And I'm joined now by Melissa Ohden, a mother, an author, a pro-life speaker, and an abortion survivor. Melissa, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You have an incredible personal story and memoir out. Can you tell us a little bit about your situation?
Yes, I am one of those kind of unforgotten people in our world today. I am a baby who survived a failed abortion. 44 years ago, I now know that my birth mother, as a 19-year-old college student, was forced to have a saline infusion abortion. And I know it's not pleasant to hear about abortion procedures, but I'll share a little bit about that procedure so people can understand what a miracle it is that I'm alive today. That procedure involved injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid surrounding me in the womb. And the intent of that toxic salt solution was to poison and scald me to death. We know through my medical records, I soaked in that toxic salt solution for 5 days, longer than what was even intended. And they finally successfully induced her labor on the 5th day, believing that I was a successful abortion, but that is the day I was accidentally born alive.
That is incredible. Who saved you?
Yeah, by the grace of God, I am here. We now know that when I was accidentally born alive, I was not immediately provided medical care. Again, I know these are horrible circumstances for people to have to hear, but we have to face that this is a reality in our world. I was told initially that the abortionist demanded that I be left there to die. But I now know through my own biological family that it was my maternal grandmother who forced the abortion and demanded that I be left there to die. She was a nurse at that hospital. And so she demanded I be left to die. And gratefully, there was at least one nurse on staff at that hospital who defied her orders and rushed me off to the NICU at St. Luke's Hospital there in Sioux City, Iowa. And that's how medical care was started that ultimately sustained my life.
You know, sometimes people would say, this doesn't happen. There's no way that this happens. But I know that I did some research on Abortion Survivors Network, and I think you said there's hundreds of people who have survived something similar.
Yes, statistically, we know that there are probably tens of thousands of people like me. The CDC said even as early as 1981, a doctor by the name of Dr. Willard Cates said he estimated 400 to 500 live births a year after failed abortions. I run those figures nearly every day through my head, and we're approaching, after 48 years of legalized abortion, nearly 20,000 survivors like me. Through my organization, the Abortion Survivors Network, we have been gratefully connected with 403 of them.
Which is incredible. You know, in states like Massachusetts, of course, New York, they've passed abortion laws which really push abortion through the 9th month of pregnancy, which has a lot of people very, very concerned. In Massachusetts in particular, there's a petition now to protect babies who are born alive, whether it be an abortion or, you know, born alive in any circumstance. They were careful about the wording, and that's one of the issues. But I think, again, a lot of people think, well, it's impossible that this would actually happen. How do you make that case when you're talking to people? Because it is disturbing to hear. It seems unbelievable that somebody would want you to just walk out of the room. But this is actually happening. How do you make that case to people whose hearts are not open to being pro-life?
There's a couple of points I think that are important to make. And I think the first one is, you know, the more we see aggressive abortion happening through all 9 months of pregnancy, the greater the likelihood is going to be that somebody like me comes into the world. The abortionist wrote on my medical records I was probably 18 to 20 weeks. I mean, he didn't identify me, right? He was saying gestationally, my birth mother's probably 18 to 20 weeks. I was probably 31 weeks. That's what a neonatologist remarked when I was born alive. So we have to kind of bridge that gap to realize that the more this is expanded, the more we should actually have legislation on hand to protect people like me.
Absolutely.
If we're going down that path, then this should be a no-brainer. But obviously, we know what happens in our world. I think the other point that I want people to understand is that this is not a thing of the past. You know, I have been patted on the head essentially many times by people saying, oh, gee, I'm really sorry that that happened to you and people like you back then, but this doesn't happen anymore. how do you know?
Right.
Would you trust somebody who's lived that experience, hears it from people every single day, because we're a safe place for stories like ours? So we're the only organization that is hearing from parents who have failed abortions and children. And would you trust someone who is actually out there testifying? Because I can tell you that I hear it talked about in hearings all the time. It is not something that just happened years ago. It is happening now. And the most common way is really through induction of labor, live births, live abortion. And again, when we hear those terms, I think people just kind of want to close their ears and say, yeah, I'm checking out of this. But if they look up induction abortion and they would talk to your local, nurses, they would hear that there are these practices happening all of the time. Induced labor, believing the child will not survive, or leave them to die after it happens.
I know that you reconnected with your birth mother and father, which is really an incredible part of the story, a real a part of hope. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. There is hope to be found in stories like mine. This is not a doom and gloom story by any means. I found out my survival story when I was 14, went through a very difficult place of trauma, as many survivors do, and started looking for them when I was 19. Found out who they were when I was about 30 years old. Had some connection with my biological father, but unfortunately he passed away before we could ever meet face to face. I'm just grateful that in his passing, his family found out that I existed, and so some of his family was in my life. And my path to my birth mother was a bit more complicated. I did not start emailing and really having conversations with her until about 2013. And that's when I learned that there was a big reason why she and I could never really communicate. And that's because she spent over 30 years of her life believing that I had actually died that day at the hospital.
That's incredible. We want to thank you so much for joining us today. And where can people learn more?
Absolutely. My personal website is Ohden, OHDEN.com, or they can visit the Abortion Survivors website, abortionsurvivors.org. Find us on social media at all of those handles.
By the grace of God, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's very, very inspiring, and we appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.